welcome you to the Righteous View today. Today we started a little later, but it allowed you to get ready for us, right? So today we have special guest Pastor David Zamora. He's from Living Way, Fontana. And we also have Brother Albert Andrade, and he's also from Living Way, Fontana as well. And they're both going to give their testimonies today. But before they do, what I want you to do is I want you to get your phone. There's a little share button on the left-hand side. What I want you to do is share with your family, your friends, because I know just as much as you're going to be blessed today, your family and friends are going to be blessed as well. Amen. So, Pastor David, tell us, how was your childhood?
My childhood, I grew up in the city of Ontario, and my childhood was in the 80s. It was a pretty decent childhood, both parents in the home, and raised in the church as a kid. My mom took us to church. She was pretty faithful at doing that, and my dad wasn't a believer, and so, but a hard worker, struggled, with alcohol, drinking, and eventually led to my parents divorcing. And I think I was about 8 years old when they divorced, and then I kind of went on to live with my grandmother, and she was, a woman of faith and very strong, and pretty much kind of did what my mom did, kind of raised us in church, but the environment was different because obviously it was my grandparents. But for the most part, it was a really good childhood, just other than, the things that I experienced as a kid that, are not things that kids should be experiencing at a young age, and but for the most part, there was, a time where there was abuse, sexual abuse, and that kind of shaped my way of thinking as a young boy, and then kind of evolved into other things as I got older. And then, my teenage years were just the years of rebellious and running the streets and kind of believing that whole lie, getting caught up in that. And other than, you grow up in the barrio as a young man, and that's kind of that whole lifestyle, that atmosphere, and that's kind of what I did. I got sucked into that street mentality, the street life, and started using, started selling, started running the streets, and then, which eventually, those are the things that led me to being incarcerated and, going to prison and so on and so forth. And that's kind of my young, years from a child to.
Wow, like if I were to see you, you wouldn't think all that you went through and stuff. God has a way of cleaning us up and
exactly
putting His grace on us. Amen.
So going through all that, what would you say that was your lowest point to lead you to the feet of Jesus?
Probably after my second term in prison, I realized there, I think I was, getting already to, my, 20 years old, kind of figuring out, okay, I got my whole life ahead of me. What am I going to, kind of do in life, I think. But I think more than anything, I realize now that there was probably more people praying for me, like really intense, hard prayer. My mom was really praying. And one of the things she always says is people tell her, you're probably so blessed to see your son, because she comes to the church, and she attends here, and they say you're probably so blessed to see him serving the Lord. And how did you do it in those difficult years when he was, lost and, addicted and all that? She just said, I came to a point in my life where I prayed and I just said, Lord, I turn him over to you. Whatever you do, that even meant if you take him from me, whatever you do to get his attention, you do what you got to do. He's yours.
That's awesome.
And that for her was the hardest thing for her to do, because one, I was her son, but God gave her the grace. And when she says that, a lot of times I think like, wow, that must have been really hard for a mom to pray that. But there's a gal that I met a few years back that was writing some pretty powerful things about prayer. And one of the things she talked about was unsafe prayers. where you just kind of pray something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, God, you do whatever. And so that kind of put things in perspective for me, and that's what my mom said. She goes, I just turned him over to the Lord and just trusted God. And so at that point, I think is when my low point was, you know, being strung out. You know, I was a kid. I think I was 13 years old when I started shooting up, and I slammed all the way till I was about, you know, 20 years old. And that for me was, you know, all of my crimes and things that I did were behind my addiction. So that was it, realizing, you know, that I needed to change in my life, and the Lord used a guy in prison to tell me about the Lord, and that was, I would say that was a low point, because that was a time in which I reached out. Yeah. And then the Lord did a radical. I just shared this story earlier today with a young man that just came into our program, and I was telling him how the Lord radically changed my life, and it was behind a miracle that God did. And from that point on, nobody could ever tell me that God was not real. And it didn't happen in a church service. It didn't happen with a powerful message. It happened just with a simple challenge. And I don't recommend that you do that, but with that, it was like Gideon when he put a fleece out, because he wanted to know that the Lord was with him. And for me, I didn't know God, and I didn't know that that's what I was doing. But what I said was, I just said, God, if you're the God of the Bible, if you're the God that this man says you are, if you're the God that my mom says you are, then take this drug addiction from me. And if you do, I'll give you the rest of my life. And if you don't, then I don't need you in my life, and I'll die dopey. That was my prayer.
Wow.
And if anybody's ever used,
Yeah.
I slept that night.
Wow.
I woke up the next day.
Wow.
I've never touched another needle since.
Wow.
No withdrawals, nothing.
Wow.
That's Jesus.
You know,
That's it.
my mom prayed for me as well, and I just want to encourage you, if you're a mother and you're praying for your kids, and you're surrounded with a situation of no hope, you just kind of feel like, you know what, my son's not going to ever get saved, they're not going to, you know, ever get it, or my daughter, you know, she's still out there and, you know, she's not listening. I just want to encourage you today that these testimonies are testimonies of hope. They're testimonies of God's miraculous power, that He can change anybody. You know, I also had a praying mother as well, and she prayed for me too. And my situation, you know, if you were to know me back then, it just seemed endless. Like it was a hopeless situation, you know, where I wasn't able to change myself. My mom and dad weren't able to change me. You know, my dad tried putting me into a drug rehab program, a secular one, and then I also went into, you know, Christian homes as well. But I was just such in bondage, you know, where I couldn't get out. And if you're a mother today and you find your children, you know, in that situation as well, I just want to encourage you today. I want to give you a little bit of hope that these two men, myself, that, you know, we were stuck in a pit where we couldn't get out, but God's power came in, and He is the one that transformed us. And, you know, just like Pastor David's mom prayed, you know, I give you my son, you know, and that kind of reminds me of of Abraham, when he just carried Isaac to the altar and was actually going to give God Isaac. And I think that a lot of times we as parents, we try to change our kids. Yeah. You know, we try to, you know, do this and do that and take them here and take them there, but we just got to surrender our kids to God and just, you know, here, you know, here's my kids.
And I want to add to that, as far as going back, how you said Abraham, you know, I have my son and he's in the military and stuff like that. So my thing is, you know, and my daughter, 24 years old, I had to do that and give my kids to the Lord.
It's
ultimately,
hard, huh? As a
well,
parent.
you know, ultimately, because my son, when he left, was 17 years old. So like right out of high school, there he is, and he goes. Number one, he's my only son, my miracle's child. And so I'm going like, oh my gosh, Lord, like, you know, I feel that that's a special calling, you know, for someone who has that heart that says, you know what, I want to serve our country. And therefore I'm going like, oh God, you know what am I going to do? And I felt exactly like you said, you just put him there pretty much at the feet of Jesus, but like as a sacrifice, going, you know what, Lord, let your will be done, because we can't change our children.
That's right.
You know, and as much as I would like, you know, my kids to be serving in the church and doing all this stuff, it's like, Lord, I gotta let you do what you gotta do. So what your mom did is just an act of faith that catapulted your, you know, getting saved. It's because it was her faith in action.
Yes.
God gave her the strength to move forward and say, now things are going to start to turn around from this point on.
That's good.
Absolutely.
So you actually came in or was part of the cast of the movie The Neighborhood. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? How was that?
So that movie in and of itself, you know, was something that we kind of, I don't want to say we, it was actually my pastor that came up with an idea that was led by the Lord, obviously. We had a young man in our fellowship here that was in what is called the Art Institute. It's like a trade school, and he had to do a project, and he says, hey, you know, Pastor, I want to do a testimony on your life. Now, I'm not really big on going and sharing my testimonies. I'm not known for that, to go and share my story at churches. I just love to teach the Word.
Right.
So when he asked me this, you know, I says, well, yeah, that's fine. What are you going to do? He says, you know, I need, like, you know, pictures and this stuff. So I was like, oh, he's going to do it like a video. So he did do one.
Wow.
And it was for like 20 minutes. And when I showed it to my pastor, he said, I want to do something like this, but I want to do a movie.
Wow.
So then what he did was he got with me, and we got a young man who is a producer out of Washington, Seattle. He's actually a pastor as well. And they gathered together 4 Calvary Chapel pastors who lived the life. That some of us had been to prison, and we were drug addicts, but we were all in gangs, which is not the norm in Calvary Chapel.
Wow, yeah.
So it's myself, David Trujillo, Pastor Tommy Cota, and Jose Hernandez. And these guys all pastor in South LA, Santa Ana, and in Watts. And then I'm here in Fontana. So that's what the movie is. It's about the life of 4 young men that kind of grew up, you know, in the life, and, you know, 2 of us went to prison, and that's what it led to, and then we all had our conversion. So it's like a docu-movie. So we're talking, and then there's scenes. It goes into scenes, and there's actors acting them out, you know. So my youngest son, he's 17, he played us when we were all younger. So we're talking,
cool.
and he's kind of playing that. So yeah, the Lord's used it tremendously.
How can our viewers watch the movie if they wanted to see?
You can go to, you can call Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa. They're the ones that produce the film. It's in the chapel store there. I know at one point it was on TBN. We all went on TBN. We were with Matt Crouch, I think is his name. Yeah, so we were on there with him, and they showed the movie on there. When they showed the movie there, we got letters from prisons all over the United States because they were watching it in the prison. So yeah, so the Lord's used it tremendously. But iTunes, for like $10 on iTunes, you can you know, download the movie.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So I know you've gotten an award, Mexican Heritage Award. Tell us about that.
The Hispanic Heritage
Oh,
Award.
the Hispanic. Something like that. Something along
Well,
those
you know,
lines.
there was a couple of awards that materialized then just because of the stuff that I was doing in the community, you know, here in Fontana, which was a lot of, you know, working with at-risk youth and going into the schools and doing gang intervention, substance abuse, conflict and resolution, anger management, kind of working with young people before they, you know, make decisions that would lead to where I ended up. And so I did that. At the same time, I was a chaplain for the Fontana Parole Office. I was doing the work here at the church. And so it was for my involvement in the community. And so it was a Hispanic Heritage Award, and there was a couple of other awards that I got from elected officials, from Congress members, from, you know, the mayor, and so on and so forth. It was done at the Government Center in San Bernardino. And it was awesome. It was an awesome experience to see, and then also to be able to share my faith on that platform, that, you know, here I am getting this award, and I was the only person that was not in any type of law enforcement, let alone I was clergy, but then the background that I had, they shared it there. And so a lot of them were like, wow, you know, this is, we need more people like this in the community that can relate, and so on and so forth. So it was an achievement. It was an accomplishment, you know.
So tell us about your church. Do you have a men's what is it, a ministry?
Yeah, we do. We have a men's Bible study that's actually meeting right now, and for the viewers,
you have a men's home though?
yeah, we have a men's home, but we have a men's study that is a ministry that's geared obviously towards the men here in the church. We have a recovery home for men that we house for a year.
Wow.
And in that process, we disciple them, we pour into them. They have an opportunity to go to Calvary Chapel Bible College, the affiliate campus we have here, an opportunity to take, general ed courses and things of that nature. So it's a good opportunity for the guys to be, kind of discipled and poured into for that year that they're there. And and they work here around the church and involved in all the activities that we have here for the men here in the church.
I always hear a lot of pastors say, well, not a lot, but I've heard some pastors say that, their church is like more women dominant based. But I honestly believe that if you're a male pastor and you pour into your male congregation, that it will grow, because whatever you put your attention to, that's what's going to grow. And I honestly, I see like a lot of, nowadays you see a lot of women like taking off and, like ministering and stuff like that. But I also believe that if, as a male pastor, you pour into your male congregation, that it would grow. Is that what happened? That it just expanded? Or?
No, the ministry was a bunch of women when we started. I mean, I had a bunch of single moms with when we first started the church. So I was, disciplining a bunch of little kids. The moms are big, like they don't listen, So here I was, But anyways, they're all teenagers now, But for the most part, yeah. And the ministry just started growing. I mean, there's a good balance here at Living Way. It's a blessing, For those of you that are listening in Living Way, we're in the sanctuary right now, live streaming from here. But anyways, for the most part.
But don't try to come right now.
Yeah, don't come right now.
Don't interrupt.
But yeah, so it's we try to cater to everybody. So we have men's ministry, women's ministry. We have a men's conference this Saturday. So for all of you men that are listening in, maybe sitting in with your wife or just checking this out, Saturday at 8 a.m. we have Pastor Dave Rolfe and James Cadiz, Bill Buffington, David Trujillo, and Dennis Davenport. All pastors in the area will be coming and speaking here. And then the 27th, we have a women's conference that...
Can you give them the address?
It's 16725 Valencia Avenue in Fontana. And you can just go to www.livingwayfontana.org, livingwayfontana.org. And we have the information there on our website. But so we have our women's conference on the 27th, where you're going to be out here and getting some of these books, out to the ladies, into the hands of the ladies that are coming here. And so we try to pour into both. And the Lord's,
there's like a balance.
Yeah, there's a balance, and the Lord's blessed that, and it's been a blessing here to do that. Yeah.
That's good. So we appreciate you coming out, or we came out, but we appreciate you being a guest and encouraging.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a blessing.
We really appreciate you, and I honestly believe that you have a powerful testimony. Just the way things are right now, and I hear a lot of parents. I get a lot of mothers, asking prayer for their kids and stuff. So I know that it's giving hope to parents out there today. But just wanted to ask Albert a couple of questions. You also come here to the Living Way, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So Pastor David was mentioning that you were incarcerated for more than 20 years.
Yeah, 21 and a half to be exact.
Wow. So how did it change your life?
Well, it wasn't necessarily prison, because I think from out of the lifestyle that I came out of, everything kind of prepares you for prison. The change came when I had that encounter with Jesus Christ.
Did you encounter Jesus inside, or?
Yeah, I grew up Catholic, so I mean, Jesus, the cross, salvation, those things were in the background, and I mean, I never really had a problem with it. I just never made the connection as a Catholic to a relationship, personal accountability, where that fit in like dealing with life on the street, and just in my personal experiences that I was having at the time. So.
You know, I hear people say that when you're in jail that it's like a weak way of getting out of the whole system that is running there.
Yeah.
You know, because it's, what do you think about that?
I think it's kind of funny that, you know, people would use that. You would figure that it's when you're in that place where you start to think about what you've done and why you're there. And,
Exactly.
and if anything, that would be the time to kind of reevaluate things. I wasn't there kind of trying to figure anything out. I figured I got myself into this situation, and I wasn't going to cry to anybody because I got myself into it, and I figured that I just deal with it the way that I dealt with things when I was outside as a kid. But you know, the Lord had something else in mind. I didn't really think of it in those terms at the time. I was just being confronted with a lot of things back to back as I went in as an 18-year-old. I think I went in about a month and a half after I turned 18. And, you know, basically what the Lord did, you know, to make a long story short, is he kind of exposed what I was involved in to me for what it was, you know, and it came through just the revelation of a lot of things that, you know, I really believe they were a certain way, and just the way things played out, you know, it was just kind of, if I didn't see things clearly before, they were crystal clear, but it was too late. I was already
Were you sentenced to 20 years or were you sentenced to life?
I was convicted of second-degree murder, so it was a 15-year term, like it's a determinate life sentence, so it would be 15 years to life. And then just with the additional enhancements all run together, it was a 16-year to life term. So which that meant that after I completed the 16 years, they would start to consider me for parole. And yeah, I did 21 and a half of that 16 to life. So.
So the 21 and a half, did you serve God those whole 21 years, or did you?
No, well, that was the thing, is that, you know, I was kind of, you know, surprised by the gospel in the middle of everything that was going on.
Wow.
I actually went to meet with somebody in the chapel in the LA County Jail that knew where the guy that actually had informed on me was housed, and we were supposed to meet so that we could talk about how we could, you know, kind of sneak over to the other dormitory when we came back from court the next time, because we were going on the same day. And when we went, the only place we could meet was the chapel, because we were in two different units. And when we went to talk, the room was so small that we couldn't talk. We couldn't even whisper. It was so small that, you know, even when we tried to whisper, anybody would hear you. It was a disruption. So there was this guy in the front of the little library holding cell room area that they had designated for chapel service, that was telling his story. I didn't know what a testimony was then, but through that story, what was revealed to me was, you know, Jesus Christ living in you, God living in you. And that really blew my mind, because I went to Catholic school for 10 years, so, you know, I'd been around Bibles, and like I said, I knew the hits, I knew the main things, but the connection was made, you know, with the whole understanding that you know, we were meant to have a relationship with God, and it was meant to be personal, and accountability was meant to be direct. So that just kind of left me with, like, what else did I miss? So that really kind of opened me up to just kind of consider the rest of what this gentleman was sharing. And at the end of it, the way he described, you know, that relationship with God, and kind of through his story, you know, I connected a lot of dots. And by the time he was done, all he said was, you know, would anybody like to have this? And I raised my hand, because I really would have liked to have what he was talking about. I wasn't really sure that it could work for me, because, you know, so many things had happened, but I really hoped that it could work for me, and I desired it. And so from that point on, I was open. It wasn't until like about 2.5 years later that I was going to trial that a friend of mine kind of introduced me to the Bible as the next dot that got connected came through that. And she had changed her life, had left the state. And through just her sharing with me what took place in her life, she introduced me to the concept of reading the Bible as if God was speaking directly to me.
Wow.
And once that took root, I just never looked back. Once I had the opportunity to read my Bible, I was always a reader. So I think I had a Spanish Catholic Bible, and I got sentenced, which I knew I was going to get found guilty. And the Lord showed me favor even there, and which I didn't know at the time. That sentence really was God's favor for me, because I could have gotten 64 to life with the charges that I was found guilty of. And the judge just saw fit to give me the least amount of time that he could within his discretion as a judge for the charges that I was charged with. And there was protests, and there was a lot of things that were going on, but the Lord was there. And I remember praying, and I remember saying, man, Lord, I don't have the right to ask you to open these doors, but I know that you can. But if I'm going to do this time, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, and I just don't let it go to waste. Don't let it be a waste. And I just remember praying like that. And when I entered the prison system, I went to reception center, and I had my Catholic Bible, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to read it. And I did what my friend told me. I prayed. And once I opened it like that, it was like nonstop, 24/7, 17 days that I read that Bible.
Wow.
And the Lord gave me time. He put people that encouraged me in the process of all of that. And ever since then, I've been reading. I went to the first prison I went to. They sent me to Calapan in '95, which was just like it was a bad place in '95, but it was in that place that I really confirmed, what I wanted to know. If God was really looking out for me, and if He was really making my way. When I got to the place, it was in a state of emergency. A lot of correctional officers had been stabbed during that time, and it looked like a movie. Trash everywhere. Didn't have anything coming. I walk into the building, I look around, and the first thought that crossed my mind was, man, how am I going to do this? And the minute that thought crossed my mind, all I heard was, Albert. And I looked one way, and then I heard my nickname. And I looked the other way, and just that feeling just dissipated in that moment. And I was like, all right, I'm going to be able to adjust here.
At one point in time in my life, I literally asked God to show me that He was with me. Because a lot of times we do things, of course believing the word, but there comes a point in time in your life when you have to know that God is real. And not only is He real, but you have to know that God is with you, right? And so there came a point in time in my life where I asked God, Lord, I need to know You're with me. Because if You're with me, then I'll do anything You ask of me. But I need to know You're with me. And so that next morning, I went to work, and the light was green, and I was going, and this car went on the red, and I stopped, and the car just, went like that. But I stopped, and then I remembered, like, wow, I asked God to show me He was with me, and He just showed me that, He protected me. And then too, like, some stuff had happened at work, and, another incident, which I really don't like to share online, but I've shared it before, but God literally showed me that He was there for me, that, He was my vindicator. He protects me. That same day, He showed me twice. And so my question to you is, has there ever been a time in your life when you were in prison that you asked God, like, show me that You're real? Because it was easy for me, because I was raised in Christianity. My mom and dad were Catholic, but by the time they had us, and we were raised Christian. So it was a little bit easier for me, but because you were Catholic and stuff, was there ever a point in time in your life where you said, is this even real?
Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is, like, what point in time did you feel that you had that true divine encounter with Christ? Like, there are even moments that we spoke about a few weeks ago, as to where you don't even have to be saved sometimes and know that God is speaking to you, right?
Mhm.
But I guess, you know, what Mari's trying to say is, when it, like, was that point in time that you said, this is a true divine encounter with God, like, this is just Christ here?
Yeah, I think it was the first chapel service that I went to at Calapat. Like I said, they were in a state of emergency, and you know, you learn who's on the yard with you during the time that you're there, and you know, I knew the guys' bios, you know, where they'd been, what they'd done. There was guys at the place where I was that I guess they're from a previous generation. So there was guys that had limbs missing from being shot in other yards, and I guess that was a common thing back then. So there was at least like 3 amputees in my area, and the guys that had done over 30 years. You know, I just remember that, and I remember walking into the chapel and not really knowing a lot of people except the people that were in my immediate vicinity, and just knowing about people that were around us. But when I walked into that chapel, they were worshiping the Lord, and I remember, because I was having that thought, just like when I got there, a lot of stuff I got to process, and I started to think about, like, man, I'm doing a life sentence, you know. As I walked into chapel that day, I saw these guys that I knew some of them had over 100 years to do, and a lot of them had caught cases in there, and I saw them worshiping the Lord. Even some of the guys that, like I said, were missing limbs, really made a big impression on me, and I was thinking, is like, man, Lord, and here I am thinking, how am I going to do this when these guys are doing this right here?
Yeah.
And you know, I want to be like that. You know, how can that happen? Because I never really thought of myself as leaving my Catholicism, because I never really saw myself as anything except what I was and what I knew. So for me, it was just kind of like growing beyond what I grew up in, and it led me to that chapel, and it led me to the Word and to getting strengthened in the things that were planted in me very firmly. Like I said, you know, once those things were introduced to me, it was like they never left me. You know, and I've been building on that ever since.
Wow. That's awesome. How about you, Pastor? Has there ever came a point in time in your life? Because I know that we can serve God by motion, you know, by routine.
Yeah.
You know? But when that happened in my life, it just made a big difference to me, the way I serve God. Has there ever been a time in your life, Pastor Bill?
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, like in the testimony, how the Lord delivered me from that. And then after, I was kind of like, okay, man, I messed up. You know, now I got to be a Christian in here. You know, that's not going to work. So I played I didn't like serve the Lord in there. I didn't do that, you know. And so it in a sense, it's kind of like, you know, the Lord did a work when I came out, because He showed me that He was still with me. And it was when I came home, you know, I wasn't walking with the Lord. I just had this miracle happen in my life, right? And so basically, I, you know, was still kind of using, but I wasn't using, you know, I wasn't slamming or nothing no more. So, you know, I was still getting high, you know, smoking weed, drinking beer, you know, go to church,
Yeah.
you know, and then just kind of trip out on what they were saying up there, you know, and then, and one day, it just hit me, you know, I was high, and it's just like, you know, I was on my way of going back to, you know, and so it was just one of those things, and the Lord used that, you know. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm leaving a friend's house, and I had a gun on me, I had, you know, drugs in my pocket, but I wasn't using those. I was, you know, selling them, but I'm going to church, and as soon as I walk out from in front of his complex, there's a sheriff parked right on the street.
Wow.
And the way I'm dressed, the way I look,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, man, and I wasn't going to stop, so I just kept walking, and I just had my back to him, and I'm walking towards the main street, and I'm just kind of like, that's it, man. I'm done. I picked up my second strike, my last term.
Wow.
So I knew right there, you know, this is going to be a foot pursuit, you know, and nothing. The sheriff just left me alone, so I walked all the way up, got onto the main street, foothill, started walking up to a payphone, to call somebody to pick me up. And yeah, they picked me up and everything. And as I was driving to my house, I thought to myself, man, God, like you were with me right there. And then it just hit me, like, not only was I with you, I delivered you from your addiction. Like, and look at you, and that's when I made a decision right there, like, I'm going to church tonight and there's no turning back, kind of thing. And I did, and that was it for me, just to see that the Lord, I guess that's what he used. And then from that point on, I just like committed to going to church and didn't look back no more. So
wow, that's awesome. What can you tell our viewers, or what can you share with our viewers if they're going through, like drug addiction or something that their situation that they can't come out? What advice can you give to them?
Well, one of the things that I would tell those that are listening in that, there is hope. Earlier, Maribel was saying that, when we're in this pit, and the thought that came to my mind is a quote by Corrie ten Boom that says, "There's no pit too deep that the love of God cannot reach in and save still." So I don't believe that anybody's far too gone. You're not far too gone. There's hope. God can do a work in your life. He can deliver you. He can set you free. That's what this is all about. These stories we talk about, but they were so long ago. I've been walking with the Lord now, almost 19 years now, faithfully committed. And, it's amazing to see what God's done in my life and what he's done in Albert's life. We've seen that in the time that Albert's been home and here with us, in the time that I've been pastoring in this community. We've seen our testimonies time and time again, over and over. We've seen people being set free because, as Paul says, that he's not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God. That's what it is. The power of God is the gospel. So there's nothing that you're addicted to or bound to that God cannot set you free from.
That's right.
If you're willing to say, okay, Lord, I need you in my life. Forgive me of my sins, and you cry out to him, and you're ready to turn that over. God can do it. That's the hope that we have, So the truth today is that you're not too far gone. God's not mad at you. He doesn't hate you. You might have burned your bridges in every relationship around. I was there. Trust me, I was there. I burned every bridge you could possibly burn and then some. But the Lord had a purpose and he had a plan and he has it for your life. And if you're sitting there and you're thinking, God could never use a person like me. Look at Albert, look at us. So God can use anybody. That's just the way I tell people. God can use anybody. So be encouraged and just know. And reach out to someone. Reach out to someone and just say, I need prayer, I need help. Listen, a program, a church, or a person could never, if I go here, it'll change me. No, only the Lord can change you. It's the Lord God who has the power to do so. And you have to come to that place and say, okay, Lord, deliver me, set me free. Albert had his encounter. I had mine encounter. They've had their encounter. We came to that crossroads and we said, okay, Lord, I'm turning to you and I'm not looking back. And so all I could say is there's hope. You're not too far gone. And, there's no sin that God does not forgive. God forgives sin. And the one thing that most people say, well, is there any sin that God does not forgive? The only thing that the scripture speaks about is rejecting his son, Jesus. I find it hard to believe that that would be something you would commit if you're watching this show. You're obviously searching and seeking. And if you're in a place where you're bound, the Lord can set you free and deliver you.
Amen. How about you, Albert? What can you tell our guest, a mother that's, believing for her son, or a wife that has a husband in prison and that is waiting for, what encouragement can you give to them?
What I can offer as an encouragement is just simply is be faithful out here. Your faithfulness out here will bless your loved ones in there. And it's kind of like the same thing that I took to heart when I was in there. There was so many things that were out of my reach that I cared about, but I had already blown it. And I had kind of killed my chances of being an influence and all these things that I cared about all of a sudden that I'm aware of. And I really couldn't blame anybody. I wasn't angry at anybody, and I wasn't trying to get away from the responsibility. But if anything, I was really trying to understand what was wrong with me. And I was pleading with the Lord, like, man, Lord, when does the change kick in? you know, when does my heart start to feel different? When does my mind, you know, I don't have amnesia. I mean, my heart tells me that you can do something here, and I want it, but all this stuff gets in the way. And the thing that kept coming back to me over and over again was learn and obey. Whatever becomes clear to me, as it becomes clear to me, just follow it and let the Lord take care of everything that's out of my reach. I had a daughter that was born 6 months after I got arrested, and I got out of prison the year I turned 40 and the year that the month that she turned 21. So I officially missed her whole life, where I should have been minding her and taking care of her and stuff. And the Lord saw a way to preserve all of that, and He was faithful. All those years that I was in there with all these guys that were grieving over what they started to understand they had done to their families and stuff. And I would tell them, you know, take heart, man. When you take care of what's on God's heart, He takes care of what's on yours, and you have no worries. And I resolved that. I was going to, like you said earlier, I gave my daughter to the Lord. That there was a point where I realized that I was kind of idolizing my daughter. And I think a lot of parents that have incarcerated loved ones a lot of times put their worry for their loved ones above their attention to the Lord. And it's understandable, but it creates a hindrance where God can't work because you're not allowing Him to be God in the situation. And I realized that, and I realized that, and I asked the Lord to forgive me, and I told Him, you can have my daughter. As I love her, and I realized that you gave her to me to do something in my heart that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I'm so appreciative of it, and I give her right back to you. And from this point on, you know, I'm not going to look back on that. And I did that. And through all of that, I got to see my daughter over and over again, and plant the seeds that now are the relationship that I have with her.
Amen.
Today, now that I'm out of there.
God is a good God. Amen. How about you, Brenda, being a mother of someone who's in the Air Force? What encouragement can you give to the mothers?
Well, as far as for myself, I just, you know, like I said earlier, I did really feel that my son, I think it's a special calling to be in the military, to be so young, you know, 17 years old. I mean, even as you young gentlemen here, I mean, I'm sure you guys were very young. I don't want to, I'm not trying to compare one for the other, but what I'm saying is that being so young and just having to almost be plucked out of your home, to be away from family and stuff is tough. And I just, you know, would say to the Lord, you know, if this is what you have for my boy, then you're going to have to take care of him. You're going to have to just really be a covering over him, an umbrella. You know, my children were raised in church. You know, they grew up in church, and I just honestly people ask me all the time, how do you do it? He's overseas, and how do you, you know, and what if this and what if that? I just go, you know what? The same way God gave him to me, and even my daughter, is the same way that He could pluck him out of my hands. So for me to try to move on behalf of the Almighty would be foolish. So I just pray for him, and I just give him to God. I mean, of course, like, you know, when we speak and stuff, I say, son, you know, don't forget, you know, who you belong to. Don't forget to read your word and, you know, pray. And after a while, it's like, okay, Mom, whatever, Mom, you know what I mean? And he's still a young man. So, and even for my daughter, you know, my daughter's still home, thank God, because I don't know what I would do if I had 2 kids gone. But, you know, it's just, I just honestly have just learned to just give them to God, and give them to the Lord, because He's the only one who can do what He says He's going to do.
Amen. So I just want to give a little shout out to some of the viewers: Yolanda Perez, Ana Garcia, Ruben A. Valles, Annabelle Hernandez, Evangelina Perez, Annabelle Hernandez, Beatrice Arcos, Angie Colossus, whatever. I can't say your name, I'm sorry. Joe Perez, Ronnie Campa, and Josie Munoz.
Hi, Josie.
Gilbert Esquivel, Anna Marie Lara, Susie Hernandez. We just want to thank you guys for being faithful watchers. And if you're new today, continue to follow us on the Righteous View page. Like our page so you can get notified every time we go live. And also if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can see the videos without any interruptions. Amen. Amen. So we just want to thank our guest, Albert, and Pastor David. We just want to thank you guys for coming once again. And don't forget,
Thanks for having us.
Wednesday we'll be having another TRV.
A
Amen?
regular
A regular
scheduled program.
This was a special segment.
Yes.
So we love you, and we'll see you again on Wednesday.
God bless you
Yes.
guys.
Thank you guys. Bye.